see if Google will play nice now.
All right, looks like we're all back. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Xbox, just to catch you up before we jumped out there, Art and Daniel and I were talking about what evidence is there of evolution. When you think, hey, there's lots of evidence of evolution, Art gave us a list. Can you run through in your mind what would be a list of evidence for evolution?
Evidence for evolution. See, I'm not real caught up on stuff, and I admit all the time I kind of have. I think I did on the last one that I do have a faith in the scientific method, and with the info I don't know, all I can do is trust it, and if I have a issue with it, then I can look into it. But so I always see that, you know, just offspring, like you were saying with the micro, is what we can observe now. That's something that we can see and observe. On the changing parts, I don't know too many details on them, on what you're calling macro.
Yeah, that would be changing a different, you know, from a dog to now something that is no longer a dog. Mm-hmm. And the argument would be,
as far as I know. Sorry. Go ahead. I had a lag.
Yeah, I was just going to say the argument is we've never seen that happen. It's not observable, testable, repeatable. The macro, or changing from a dog into now something that is no longer a dog, doesn't fit the evolution or the criteria for becoming what we would call science.
Gotcha.
But the problem is, that's why I kind of objected to the definition of science that you kind of suggested in the beginning, because there's a subtle implication of science being purely empirical, purely observational, and it's not. It can include logical inferences. We can construct models that basically predict something. In the beginning, they're ideas, they're hypotheses, and they say how things should be. And they can predict things. They can predict future empirical evidences, like the fossil record, or like useless organs, like I mentioned before. And we can find these things, and they're perfectly in line with evolution. So that's the body of evidence. That's the strength of evolution.
When I look at the exact same evidence, and I didn't know if you want to jump in there, but when I look at the same exact evidence that you look at, and I've listed them out here, Xbox, just so you know, Art said the fossil record, embryology, the embryo in the womb going through the stages of evolution, vestigial organs such as the dukes that, you know, the claws that dogs have on their arm, comparative anatomy, I threw that one in there, and then DNA evidence. And we mentioned last time that really the way we see this evidence depends on what we believe before we ever get to the evidence. I could look at each one of these things and say, I think these are great evidence for God creating the world and the worldwide flood, and could look at every single one of these and go, no, that's not evidence of evolution. That information you're seeing is actually evidence of creation.
Yeah. But not to put them all in the same category, because obviously the like the embryo stages, you know, that's just bad science and bad inferences right there, which was proven wrong, what, how long ago?
1874.
1874, and the guy who drew up those drawings, Haeckel, he went to court, I guess had a whole battle.
At the University of Jena, and lost his, his own university. Well, let's deal with that one, and then we'll take these other ones. The whole idea of embryology, that the embryo goes through the stages of evolution. Back in 1859, Charles Darwin wrote his, or 1859, Charles Darwin wrote his book On the Origin of Species. He said in his book, there should be lots of evidence of evolution if my theory is true. Well, 10 years later, they hadn't found any. So Ernst Haeckel in 1869 actually drew some fake drawings of embryos, and I've got them in here on my computer if I can pull them up quick enough. He drew some fake drawings of some embryos of a dog and a pig and a fish and a couple other things, and he said that these embryos were going through the stages of evolution in the womb of the obviously of the parent. Let me see here. So he's saying he's going through those stages. Bottom line is, his own university convicted him of fraud. He lied. He deceived people. He made up all this evidence. It was not true what he put on there.
He was a good illustrator, though.
Yeah, definitely a good
He was
illustrator.
good at illustrating. It's just that it was illustrations based on his creativity. Because
All right, guys, can I?
for the truth of evolution, and it was just a false premise.
Can I correct myself because I think I explained badly what I meant by atavism. Atavism is actually it's not just embryology. It's not really embryology at all. Atavism is the this is difficult to explain. I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist, guys. I'm kind of using my common vernacular here, and I'm Russian. English is not the first language here. Basically,
Hang on, Eric. If you click on your thing where you present it and hit present to everyone, everyone can see that out in the audience.
I think only the person who made the Hangout can make it present to everybody. So it's the office computer that can do it.
Okay. Yeah, there.
Right, when we're on the live Hangout.
Okay, sorry.
Right, so basically it's the phenomena of vestigial organs appearing in animals and even humans, possibly at least, that are remnants of their ancestry. For example, you can have kind of legs on snakes, or kind of vestigial flippers on dolphins. That is atavism, basically.
Okay, so more of the vestigial structures, which gets into another subject. What are you guys, real quick then, what are your thoughts on the idea of embryology? And would you say, hey, embryology, the idea that an embryo goes through the stages of evolution is evidence of evolution? I don't know if you can see the picture here. On top right here is what Haeckel drew. On the bottom are the actual photographs of the different animals. And on the top you can see he drew them to look very, very similar. On the bottom they don't appear exactly the same as what he drew. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I don't know too much in depth on this thing, but I've seen those pictures before, and I almost see that as a metamorphosis type thing. I'm not sure if that even plays into it, but that's how it looks to me. That it's more than that than an evolutionary thing.
Yeah, I'm not exactly familiar with this argument at all. So no, I would not use embryology.
Yeah, I would almost see it if almost like trying to put a butterfly or a caterpillar turned into a butterfly as evidence for evolution. I don't think that would fit either, kind of thing. But I do have a question for y'all real quick. You made
help me out with something then in the future, because this right here is the textbooks from '99. They're still using embryology in textbooks today as evidence of evolution, even though it's been proven wrong. It's been proven to be a fraud, but here it is in a lot of different textbooks. It still shows up as evidence for evolution. This is one of the ones that they give when they're talking about evolution. Here it is over and over and over, more and more textbooks talking about embryology and saying that this is evidence of evolution.
Well, I don't know. Maybe there is a good argument to be made here for evolution, but I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I was just going off what it looks to me too as well. I'm not real too familiar with the embryology. I do see what you're saying though from those pictures on to that. I would have to agree with you, but beyond that, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, they still teach it in the textbooks and in the schools and stuff. So people are armed with that in their head as like, hey, this is proof of evolution, and obviously that's scientifically wrong, and it was a big fraud.
Okay, let's take your other one that you were just mentioning then, and let's go to the concept, the idea that are there useless vestiges, yes, that are still in animals today? Let's just look at the history of the idea of vestigial organs. 100 years ago, there were 108 vestigial organs on the list that they said the human body had. 108 vestigial organs. Do you know how many organs are on the vestigial organ list today in the human body?
I'm not sure.
No, I know there's tons of claims, but I don't know in depth of those either. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are none. There are no vestigial organs on the list. They used to say the human appendix is vestigial, and now they know that this is where some immune responses are initiated. And I think there's a confusion here, and I think every single one of these claims that people say are evidence for evolution can be gone through and shown, look, hold it, there's some confusion. just because you can live without something does not mean that it's vestigial. I mean, I can live without both my arms, both my legs, both my ears, and both my eyes. That doesn't make them vestigial. Just because you can live without something doesn't mean you don't need it. And so looking at the human appendix, which they said was vestigial, and I should look up all the vestigial organs that used to be on the list. There were 108 of them, a bunch of them.
Wow.
And now there's none. The human tailbone, the coccyx, is another one. Have you ever heard that that's evidence of evolution, that the human coccyx is from when we used to have a tail, but we lost it because we didn't need it?
Yeah, I've heard people argue that as being a vestigial organ, and I don't. Even the vestigial organ things, I don't know. I guess that could still be considered a microevolution thing. If I don't know that I've ever seen it, and I can't name any vestigial organs, kind of thing. But and that leads to something, and we talk about it once you go through that list. But you said a minute ago when you went through the list that those show you evidences of God, and stuff. And at some point, I'd like to know where you go from these things, because I mentioned it in the last one too. Even if all this was flipped upside down and completely wrong, I don't know how to make that gap, to bridge that gap.
Well, the beautiful thing about vestigial organs, in my opinion, is it really shows how science and creation and everything works together. Because this was, just 100 years ago that they had this whole list of all these vestigial organs. And if everybody just went with evolution is true, therefore those are vestigial, then they would never look into, like, hey, what is the purpose of the tailbone, or what is the purpose of this or that? And so they would just leave it alone, and of course that would be a travesty to science. But instead, Christians, we know that, hey, God created everything, and so everything has a certain purpose. And so we know we didn't evolve from some other type of life form, because we can't turn from one kind into another. That's scientifically impossible. And so therefore, what's the purpose of these things? And we can study those things until we finally find out, oh, look, here's what it is. That it even takes it to the microscopic level with DNA, because for so long they had junk DNA that they just were like, oh, well, this is just left over from the primordial soup or whatever that we don't use anymore. But the more they study it, the more they've categorized all the DNA stuff, they find out, hey, this is actually the most important part of the DNA.
There is no junk DNA.
Yeah, there's no such thing as junk DNA.
It really is incredibly designed.
But yet, if evolutionists were in charge of science, we would still think that DNA has junk DNA, and we would still have over 100 vestigial organs, and people would just blindly believe that because that's what they're told. And so that's kind of dangerous.
I think they used that term junk terribly whenever they did, because I don't think they meant junk as in useless. I think they meant junk as in not what they're defining at the time. It doesn't have to do. They don't know what it does. It's not, but they know what some of the others do, and since it's not involved in these processes, it's junk to that process. I think it was terrible kind of press thing, and I actually believe with the kinds. I know kinds isn't really well defined. It's not a scientific term. But I made the argument the other day and got crap for it that science does show we come after our kind, even when they're saying we came from a fish, we're still a fish, or we come from an ape, we're still an ape. It still came after its kind. There wasn't ever a time where a fish gave birth to an ape and an ape gave birth to us, kind of thing.
Right. A lot of people think that there is, though.
Yeah.
So
yeah, some do, for sure.
Okay, so help me out here. Now, just because the word kind isn't something that is in the scientific classification system, I would say the scientific classification system wasn't invented, in line with what God's word says. So the kind would fall somewhere around the family level, and I can give you a definition of kind that can never be refuted. A kind are the original animals that were capable of reproducing. Now we can't refute that, whereas when it comes to species, we all know scientists do not have a good definition of species, because any definition they come up with, there's an exception to that rule. Mm-hmm. But we still can't define species, even though I can define kind. You mentioned something earlier. You said, Daniel, you said that this aligns with God's word. I would say that's exactly right. When we take God's word as our starting point and say we were designed by an intelligent designer, then the science that we see today lines up perfectly with that. The science that we see today of, okay, hey, we thought the appendix was vestigial, now we found out it's not. We thought the tailbone was vestigial, now we know that it is not. There are 9 different muscles that attach to the tailbone, the coccyx. Without those muscles, you cannot perform some functions that you really need to perform. And so you have to have those. So that takes that one kind of off the list of evolution and says, hey, once again, God's word is true. We are incredibly designed.
Can I just add something here, guys? When it comes to vestigiality, when scientists say it's useless, they don't mean it's completely useless. It can have some secondary use, like as you said, the cervix, I think it's pronounced. You have muscles attached to it, so you have some functionality there. The thing is, coccyx, right? Coccyx, yes. The thing is, coccyx is expected to be there by evolution. It is essentially a prediction, I think, and it's where a tail would be forming, right? So that's why they say it's vestigial, because the primary function of that is no longer there. There's a secondary function.
And that is a strong inference and assumption that you're jumping there, because that's not scientific. You can't observe that. That's just you're presuming your idea of evolution onto what the evidence is, and so therefore you're kind of putting that together and saying, oh, well, that must be scientific. But that's not. That's just trying to put trying to put a fairy tale to the evidence, which is
right. It's making up a story to fit what we see. So the facts are, we see a coccyx. We see there are 9 muscles attached to it. Those are the facts. We don't have any facts that say this used to be a tail or this could evolve into a tail. Matter of fact, I would argue that goes against the evolution theory. Because if we lost our tail because we supposedly didn't need it, I would say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. I mean, if you've ever come to the door with 2 sacks of groceries in your hand, a tail would come in really handy at that point. So I don't think you can use that as evidence of evolution.
Yeah.
Well, evolution doesn't.
For evolution, you would have to, by the same reasoning, you'd have to say, well, I have a nose, and the nose points out a little bit, so that means it used to be an elephant's nose, and so now I've evolved from an elephant. You know, it's just as ridiculous on that end of things.
Well, of course, it doesn't work like that. And again, I'm not a scientist, and to be honest, I wasn't prepared for an evolution discussion. I thought we were going to go on the philosophy stuff like before, but I will do my best. I have here another vestigial structure. It's a molecular vestigial structure, and it's the Elgulana. Oh my goodness, I cannot possibly pronounce this.
Paste it out there. I'll try to help you.
Yeah, I will just paste it in the chat, and my buddy here will try to pronounce it.
No, yeah, right.
It's basically an enzyme that
Lactone oxidase.
Yeah, it's a enzyme that produces vitamin C, and we see these enzymes in other animals. Animals who do not have an intake from their food of vitamin C, but humans do have this because humans, under evolution, humans evolved from tree monkeys essentially, or tree apes, I think. So they would have enough input vitamin C from their food, and that's why it would be not useful. However, this enzyme still exists in humans. It's turned off. Now, what better explains this? That God created this useless DNA code that it has no use in the genome at all, or that evolution, progressively selected for this gene not to operate because it's not useful.
Let me ask you, if you could be looking at it from a totally wrong perspective, could it be that that gene used to be turned on in the human body, and it was better, and we, the human race, are devolving, not evolving? It used to be on when God originally designed the race. It was good, it was perfect, it was nothing wrong, no genetic defects, no deformed chromosomes. And could it be that you're looking at it from the totally wrong perspective, and it could be that it used to be on, it produced vitamin C. I know it still does in goats. Goats can eat pretty much anything. They don't get sick because they have this ability to produce vitamin C. Could it be that we had the same thing, and now that's been turned off?
Of course it could be. And you see, this is the problem with sort of supernaturalism when included in science, because you can explain anything with supernaturalism, especially an agent that can do anything, especially if you have...
Let me just stop you right there and say, look in the mirror, because you're doing the exact same thing, but instead of calling it supernaturalism, you're calling it evolution.
So you're saying we can explain everything with evolution? Oh, sorry, you're basically suggesting that we can explain everything with evolution as well?
Oh, no, I'm not. I would say your explanation is all you're looking at evidence and making up a story to go with it, rather than looking at the foundation. And this is where it gets into the philosophical, like looking at the foundation and saying this has to be true. Now let's explain the evidence.
And furthermore, the thing is with evolution is it really all hinges on your creativity as an individual person. And so whereas our supernatural answer is contained in here, we got 66 books of God's revelation to us. Evolution, on the other hand, is supernatural explanation for things, but it stems out of creativity of people. And so no matter what the evidence is, like if you're looking at fossils or you're looking at whatever, you're going to come in with some story that connects it evolutionarily somehow because it's pretty easy to do. Because if you can make up anything you want and not have a standard, whereas we do have a standard, and so therefore we don't get to make up the attributes of who God is. We just have to accept the attributes of who He already is. And we have to see that.
I would agree.
Here's an example.
I would agree with you. If science worked that way with it, I would agree with you. But
it doesn't.
Yeah, I think science finds the evidence and then sees where it leads instead of.
That's the problem. In reality, though, guys, it doesn't. It is not looking at the evidence and coming to conclusions. It has, and we discussed this in the last show, or in the last conversation, we come at the evidence is neutral. We all have the same, if we had a pile of evidence here, a pile of fossils, we're looking at the same thing, but we're coming to different conclusions. So the evidence is not the issue here. What we're looking at is not the issue. It's what we believe. And when you start with evolution happened, there is no God, now you must, by very definition, come up with a way for these fossils to fit what you believe. I believe, in the beginning, God. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. I look at these fossils, which are found by the trillions all around the world, and fossilization only happens under specific circumstances, and I go, no, these are great evidence of the flood that destroyed the world. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have all these fossils. So the evidence is not the issue. Science is not the issue here.
I disagree wholeheartedly. For example, there are certain types of evidences that evolution cannot explain at all. For example, a bunny in the Cretaceous or a human in the Cretaceous. That would falsify evolution immediately. And that has been tested, actually. I'm sorry, Eric. I know I need a pause. I'd just like to add something that
no problem.
This thing was actually tested. And you know how it is tested? Eric, do you, or both of you guys, do you know how this thing is tested, essentially? If there is a bunny in Cretaceous period?
Oh. Okay.
By science. They do a dig. They dig for fossils all the time. And all the time they risk of finding a bunny in the Cretaceous, which would falsify evolution. That has never happened. Out of millions of fossils that we dug up, that has never happened.
Okay,
Now,
first of all,
Mhm.
yeah, you're assuming that, aren't you? You're assuming that that's never happened.
Well, of course, I cannot possibly know for sure that it never happened, but based on everything that we know so far, unless we want to, propose a conspiracy.
Well, no, I'm not supposing a conspiracy. I'm just saying you're assuming that out of all the fossils that have been found, nothing's ever been found in there.
There's actually plenty.
Yeah. Second, we got another problem. Typically, the way we define a layer is based on what fossils are found in it. So if you say, if you find this fossil, it is this kind of rock, it's this layer, that by very definition, you can never find a bunny in the Cretaceous because you define, anytime you find a bunny, it's going to be, this is what layer it's found in, and you automatically, by very definition, eliminate any
There's a lot of crooked scales and balances going on.
Not to mention, they have found soft-bodied creatures in the Cambrian strata, which goes totally against. I mean, there's lots and lots of articles out there of things that have been discovered in the wrong layers.
They even have a name for it. It's so common. So it's oop art.
Yes.
Which is fun to say.
Oop art.
Yeah, say that again.
Oop. O-O.
Oop art. I got you.
OOPART. So it's out of place artifacts. So it's an acronym. Oop art.
Matter of fact, if you go to searchcreation.org, and just type in fossils in wrong layers, you'll see a whole bunch of links there of articles. They find fossils in wrong layers all the time. So when you say, look, if they ever found fossils in the wrong layer, then that would prove, I'd say, done. evolution's done then. We can end the discussion, and we need to ask you guys if you're ready to repent and trust in Christ as your Savior.
Well,
Not to pull up the bridge though. That does go to where I was leading was the gap. That's if evolution is wrong, how does that jump us to God?
especially a specific one.
Yeah, and you're right, and this is why I took the different approach that we took in the last conversation.
Sure.
And I said, look, I can prove evolution wrong. That's easy. We can go through fossils, we can go through embryology, we can go through comparative anatomy, all of these things we can go through. But that I'm not arguing to the conclusion, oh, therefore God must exist. That's why in our last conversation it got very philosophical, and I said, hold it. If you don't start with revelation from God, you can't even have knowledge. You can't know anything. Now, Xbox, you agreed. Matter of fact, your username is that's you. You say, hey, I can't know anything except that I exist. If you can't know anything except that you exist, which is what you said in the last conversation, then how do you know you're in the pursuit for truth? How do you know about fossils? How do you? I mean, you can't know.
I don't know. You're right. I can't know. Yes.
So that kind of ends, and that's where I go. The reason I went philosophical on that first discussion is because of that point. I went, look, if you don't start with God, you can't have knowledge. And at the conclusion of the hour and 15-minute conversation, we said, oh, you either start with God, divine revelation, or you can't know anything. And that was our conclusion.
I don't think so. I disagree. That's not how I at least remember it. I can find a lot of problems with the sort of typical precept, especially of sight and variety. For example, I could ask you, how do you know that you have been revealed something by a God?
And I would simply say the answer is because he revealed it.
But you begin a question. How would you know that this revelation, first of all, is true and that it's from God?
Well, think about my other choice. My other choice is I don't know anything.
Oh, wait, how does that follow?
Therefore,
Well, do you know anything?
you start with God and do nothing at all.
I do know a lot of things. What
And
do
we
you mean
went
it's-
through this whole thing. The last time you said, well, I at least know one thing. I know I exist. And then you
Yes.
said, oh, you know what, make that two things. I know that I don't know everything.
Yes. And also, I know that I'm not your God.
We know that too.
We know that too. And I would say that you know lots more than that. I would say, you know what? Art, you know that 2 + 2 = 4. Art, you know that you are from Russia. You said that. You said your name. You said, hey, I'm Art. I'm from Russia. I mean, you said a lot of things. You made a lot of knowledge claims. And I would say,
He even knows a completely different language.
that's true. Privyet. And I'd say you know a whole lot of things, but again, that's based on the God of the Bible. And this is where we get right back into a philosophical argument. So before we hit that philosophical argument, which I know some people are going to be like, oh, let's go there. Hang on. Are you saying, either one, Art or Xbox, are you guys saying, hey, I admit evolution may not be true?
Oh yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, like I said, I with the faith in the scientist part.
Yeah, I would. I don't think I heard your question, but if you're saying,
Sorry.
if Eric, if you're saying that if I can consider that evolution could be true, the answer is yes. I'm sorry, I misspoke. If you're telling me, can I consider evolution being false? Then yes, the answer is absolutely yes. Nothing in atheism hinges on evolution. I can just not know how this life began or diversified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. But I'm enjoying the evolution talk if that's what you want to stay on.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I mean, a lot of people have to go with evolution or some form of evolution that they've creatively come up with in their head because they deny the true God of the Bible that created everything and has everything going. And I find that a lot of people claim that they reject the God of the Bible because they reject miracles and they reject divine interventions and the supernatural. And so would you guys say that you would cling to evolution or cling to atheism because you reject supernatural acts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people can come to atheism or theism for bad reasons, and I think if that's what hinged to become an atheist was that you saw evolution, I think that would be a terrible reason. Or if you hinge to Christianity because you thought evolution was false, even the same, or like if that's what it hinged on, I would I
Right.
would say it's bad reasons.
So you'd say Richard Dawkins going to atheism because of evolution is a bad reason.
Yeah, definitely. That would be a bad reason for sure. Maybe he has good reasons now, but I don't know. I haven't really. I used to watch a few of his things, but if that is actually what started him with it, that was definitely a bad reason.
Yeah, because the interesting thing that builds on the supernatural rejection is that with evolution, you still have to believe that miracles happen, because evolution goes completely against the scientific method and the scientific laws that we have in place. You know, like the law of biogenesis. You know, it's like life cannot come from non-life. That's a set law. We know that, but yet evolution believes that it happened at one time. You know, there was nothing.
That's not evolution. That's abiogenesis.
Yeah, so
Right.
the evolution, the entire worldview of no God, adopting evolution as how we got everything into existence. And again, that comes down to what do we mean by evolution, and you're using the allele frequencies. And I started at the beginning of the conversation to go back and say, well, there's actually several types of evolution. Abiogenesis, organic evolution, would have to be one of those. How did you get life from non-life?
Yeah, I don't know. I know there are different hypotheses, and there is evidence for possible mechanisms for certain.
How is there evidence that goes against scientific evidence, scientific knowledge, scientific laws, facts?
You see, that's the thing. You treat it as a fact, but science doesn't deal with absolute facts as we understand it. Science deals with observations and predictive models.
Are
The law-
the observations factual? Do they have to be factual in order to observe them?
Yeah, sure.
But if science doesn't deal with facts, then not even our observations can be factual.
No, you're misunderstanding. The laws of science, like you said, the law of biogenesis, it's not an absolute law. It doesn't have to necessarily apply everywhere. We can discover that somewhere actually life can come from non-life. Even same goes for gravity. We can discover somewhere along the line that, look, here gravity doesn't work at all. Or
Okay,
look,
hang on just a
gravity.
second, Mark.
Yeah.
You got to understand, you just jumped from science to fairy tale land, and you need to understand
You
that.
just went to supernatural acts without a supernatural God.
What do you mean?
Well, have we ever observed life coming from non-life? Is that
No.
anywhere observable in science whatsoever?
No, that's why it's a hypothesis. It's not a theory.
Oh, so really it's your blind faith, and we
No.
should take that out of the textbooks because we don't want religion in the textbooks.
You misunderstand, Eric. Scientists don't dogmatically claim that abiogenesis is an absolute fact, that it happened absolutely. You know, it's just is, and if you don't agree with us, you're just wrong. What they say is, look, we have here a working model of reality that best fits the evidence, or could possibly fit future evidence, and we should search for this evidence. It's in a stage of a hypothesis.
Well, if the evidence shows that life doesn't come from non-life, then that hypothesis is pretty weak.
Well, the evidence. The thing is, we have not observed the whole history of Earth, right? So we don't know that this applies to every part of Earth and every time in Earth's history.
That's not scientific. That's fairy tale.
No.
You can believe that if you want, but
See,
don't
yeah,
call it science.
Now
That's
we're
not
entering
science.
your belief system rather than real science. That's why I said, what is science? What can we really classify as science? Are you saying that the hypothesis of life coming from non-life should fit into the realm of science?
It is part of science. It's not an established scientific theory.
If that is part of science, then we can also say that God, as the source of life, created life about 6,000 years ago in 6 literal days, and we can say that is also part of science.
Because this is a hypothesis just like yours is.
Hardly, because you cannot make specific predictions from your hypothesis.
You cannot test what you just said either.
But we can
Of course we can.
That's
Of course.
I think what Art's saying is that it's unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
Use the other method. If you do the God and then do it.
Yes.
If it wasn't, I would agree with you.
So hang on. Are you saying that the idea that life came from non-life is not falsifiable?
know that a supernatural God being can't be tested by science, kind of thing. And
Right.
how you started it, saying that it wasn't part of science, kind of thing.
Okay, so Art is doing the exact same thing. He's saying, hey, we can't prove that life didn't come from non-life at some point. And I'm going,
So therefore, it must be science.
how is this not the same? How is this not absolute blind faith? Tell me that.
Well, I don't understand why you're saying faith. I'm not actually saying that this happened for a fact. I'm saying this is a possibility. That's what scientists are saying. This is a possibility. We have this idea of how this could have happened, and we're going to search for more evidence.
Well,
We're
I
not saying.
also have an idea of how my toilet gets cleaned every week because a bunch of fairies come in and sprinkle pixie dust on it when I'm asleep,
That's
and so
gross.
therefore that must be science.
No, it's not science because it's not falsifiable. It doesn't have accurate predictions, and it's supernatural.
Okay, everything we've seen in science, and it kind of boggles my mind. Every law, every observation we've ever made in science says life only comes from life. You're saying, but it's also scientific to think that it could have come from non-life. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess so.
You're jumping from verifiable, observable evidence to abstract fairy tale land to try to fit a theory that
You misunderstand.
scientific basis.
I'm not saying that when it's scientific, that it's an established science. There's a difference. Okay, a
Well,
hypothesis is basically an idea. An established theory is based on fact. That's what evolution is. That's an established idea based on fact, based on predictions. Abiogenesis is essentially an idea with a little bit of evidence for its possible mechanisms.
There is zero evidence for that. None.
Okay.
So the theory that life comes from non-life goes completely against the scientific evidence of life not coming from non-life or life.
Well, okay. Let me try to explain this.
Therefore, you're trying to
Life,
pursue it and not throw it away, because that's something you can easily throw away and say, well, that's not possible because life only comes from life, which
well, okay.
actually lines up with what we believe because God is the source of life, and therefore He created everything. He created life. That's where life comes from, is God.
I understand your perspective.
God is non-existent.
Well, let me try to explain this argument that you said. Law of biogenesis. In science, we can contradict the laws if we have evidence for it, or we can hypothesize about them if there is a possibility that we can find evidence. At least that's my understanding. Again, I'm not a scientist, and I can bring you an example of such an event happening. Theory of relativity. It has overthrown Newtonian mechanics. Not completely, but many of the principles of Newtonian mechanics were overthrown. And we have also quantum mechanics, which doesn't even fit with the theory of relativity, not to mention Newtonian mechanics, right? So if we hold your position that established laws of science, like the law of biogenesis, is an absolute fact that no one can contradict, we would never come to a new understanding of reality by much deeper research and hypothesizing about contrary explanations.
Well, this does make sense because this actually goes back to the philosophical argument of what he was talking about in the last conversation. Because to deny God, you're being consistent with your belief system, which I give you credit for that. Because to deny God, you actually have to deny reality, because that's the only thing that makes sense. You have to deny all knowledge. And so what you're explaining right now is that you can't take any scientific law as credible, solid, because you're saying anything can still happen. Even though a scientific law sets this, we can still contradict it somehow, and we can believe something that opposes it. And so essentially what you're doing is denying reality, which makes sense.
Okay,
Deny God, so you have to deny reality.
And
just because
I don't want to jump to to another conversation. Actually, our time is up. Unfortunately, I have to go, and we have to end this conversation. I want to pick it back up though, because we went through just a couple of the evidences. Xbox, you said, hey, okay, I'll give it to you. Comparative anatomy, or not, embryology. All right, throw that one out. The idea of vestigial organs. Okay, throw that one out. And I think we could go through the others as well and show evolution is not true. And while that doesn't give us a positive claim to the Bible or creation, that does eliminate really the only other option that's out there. And so that's why that is an interesting, field of thought for me to go down and to look at the evidence and see the evidence does not agree with evolution. Art, it seems to me like we've said, or that your claim here, I'll summarize and I'll let you guys summarize real quick. You're saying, hey, just because it's a scientific law doesn't mean it's a scientific law in essence, because we can still look for evidence that goes against it. My problem with that is well, I guess Daniel summed it up the best. You're denying the reality that we know in hopes of, or in the possibility of something else, which gets down to the philosophical problem of, can we know anything? Can we have knowledge? And I submit that without God, we can't know anything. That'd be my summary. I'll let you guys summarize real quick, and we'll have to end the conversation and pick it up in a few more weeks.
All right, Xbox, you want to go first?
Well, you go ahead. Address what he said.
All right, so I don't think that I denied knowledge at all. Just because it is possible to overthrow or contradict our current knowledge, and I grant you that we can know that life comes from life. It's a justified belief. However, that doesn't mean that it's absolute, and I don't believe in all knowledge being absolute. So I don't see a problem there at all. And I'd just like to say thank you for the conversation, guys. I would like to do this again because, as I said, I did not expect it. I expect we're going to go into evolution a little bit. I was expecting more of the philosophy, so I was not prepared. I welcome a second discussion about evolution. Absolutely. Go ahead, Xbox.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, and I'd like to look into some of the stuff as well too. I think I told you pretty much my stance was even if it was flipped, but that I would still, it doesn't hinge anything. But I kind of agree with you some again as well. I kind of with the art thing about knowledge. I don't think I can have an absolute knowledge kind of thing, but I do think I can have knowledge, and maybe we can talk about that some other time as well. But I enjoyed this whole discussion, so and learning, and something to look into. So.
Cool, Daniel.
Excellent. Yeah, I love discussions like this. Technology is a little weird. Four people in 3 different places trying to connect to the computer, and then other people watching. A little strange, the generation we live in, but this is cool. It's a good way to be civil, because obviously when you're face to face with a lot of people get real emotional and they're shouting over each other, and that's crazy. So it's nice that we can sit down and have a intellectual conversation and bring forth some of the things that are on our minds and our hearts. So I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Awesome. Look forward to talking to you guys again next time. God bless.
Take care.